This program explores a wide variety of medical topics and supports patients, wellness entrepreneurs, and other related professionals through collaboration and cross-promotion. As an entrepreneur who lives with a chronic condition, I love networking with professionals of like mind who are looking to expand their reach. Well, this episode focuses on how cancer patients can survive and thrive after treatment. My guest today is Mark Kelly, author, sports historian, and survivor of Rhabdomyosarcoma.
It's Rhabdomyosarcoma.
Rhabdomyosarcoma since the age of 16. It's a rare type of cancer. And Mark has released a new book called My Scars Tell a Story. You can find information about the book on ckmagicsports.com under the My Scars Tell a Story tab. You can also find the link on the Lisa F. Harris blog. And so let's get started. So Mark, you've really got a fascinating, very inspiring story. I know that you developed cancer at the age of 16. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I was diagnosed on December 12th, 1990. I was a junior in high school. And like any other kid, I had aspirations and dreams. I was a very good athlete, two-sport athlete in basketball and baseball. And that was what I kind of hoped to do. I knew that's what kind of where all my talents were. And that was also a lot of my identity, things that I knew I did very well. So when I was diagnosed, it was a total shock. Not just the word cancer, but nowhere in my, I ate very healthy. I had asthma when I was younger, so I thought that was the hardest thing that I would deal with. My mother was like a really, I don't want to say crazy, but she was like one of the first people to really focus in on health. I didn't have any like sugar cereals or anything like that, so vitamins, tissue salts, all those things. So you figure if anybody was not going to suffer from something like cancer, it would be me. But I developed what they thought was an abscess. And then when they went in to remove it, they almost killed me right there on the operating table because it was just filled with blood vessels. And then, they had to pack me with paper and, kind of make sure that I wouldn't bleed to death. And then they biopsied it. That was at a hospital out in Kings Park in Long Island. And then it came back where the initial diagnosis was terminal cancer, that I only had 6 months to live. And then they sent me to Sloan Kettering in Manhattan, which was one of the biggest cancer hospitals in the world. And that's when they re-diagnosed me with a disease called Rhabdomyosarcoma. And it's very rare. It's a skeletal muscle cancer, and it normally affects kids between the ages of 2 and 6, and I was 16. Oh. So that it just didn't add up. Like there were so many that's why it was so hard for them to diagnose. But the other thing was that it was a killer, and that it generally comes back if they treat it normally with just regular chemo and radiation. So they designed a very aggressive protocol with me that called for 5 doses of chemo, intense chemo, 2 doses of 2-week radiation, and then a bone marrow transplant. So they were essentially killing off my ability to make blood cells or blood. And my bone marrow would no longer be able to produce anything. And then they were going to give me back the bone marrow they took from me because there was no cancer cells in my bone marrow. So it was just basically in one area. And then I responded very well to chemotherapy. Within 2 treatments, the tumor was gone, and no scans showed any type of cancer.
That's amazing.
If they wanted, I remember I had wanted to stop treatment then, and my doctor says, do that, it's like putting a gun to your head because this will come back unless you go through with the rest of the protocol. You're not gonna make it. But the rest of the protocol was very. It was very, I would say a lot of it was experimental, but it was very aggressive. And then a transplant, I had so many issues, so many times I should have died. Because of the radiation, my bladder exploded about a week after transplant. And essentially all transplant is they take basically like a turkey baster. And I had a port called Broviac in me, and they kind of flushed it through. And then they thought it was the shock of that was causing my bladder to bleed. But then when they went and did surgery, they saw that I had a huge tear. And most doctors would have taken out my bladder. There was a doctor called Dr. LaQuaglia, who's still around at Sloan Kettering. and he essentially saved a lot of my life and operated on me 11 times in a 3-week span because I kept hemorrhaging. And I was losing blood faster than I could restore it. I was having 1 to 2 blood transfusions a day, 1 to 2 platelet transfusions a day. I was also dealing with the fact that when you have chemo, you have sores all up and down your throat. I couldn't swallow. I had a collapsed lung. My Broviac became infected, and they had to operate on me when I was awake to take it out. It was so many disastrous scenarios that somehow I survived. God kept me alive.
Yeah, and that's a tremendous amount to go through for a child, especially for a child. Do you have any idea what causes this rare type of cancer? I mean, it seems like your mom did everything right, you know, to keep you healthy, and then all of a sudden...
Well, I think within the area I lived in, St. James, there was a couple people that came down with the same disease. And so it was very rare that that would happen. I'm convinced it was environmental. You never know why these things happen. Nowadays, they have a lot more ways to find out if there are certain genes that you have in your body that can cause certain things. But, you know, that's kind of what I deal with now is, you know, how can I use the things that I've been through? Because I had the, you know, the ability to work taken away from me because of the side effects. And that's essentially what, you know, I made this about in my book and with other things that I'm doing now. Okay.
Well, you have a website called CK Magic Sports. Why did you start that website?
Well, sports was always my passion. After I could no longer be an athlete, I was able to get a job at ESPN, and I was a researcher for them for 10 years. I went to Emmy Awards with my work on SportsCenter, on Baseball Tonight, on ESPN News, and you know, and that was essentially like I was a researcher for them. I started off in college basketball, and I did Major League Baseball. I did a morning show called Cold Pizza, which I was involved in. I ran a lot of segments, you know, wrote a lot of things, and that was a strength of mine. But I started developing side effects. I always had stomach issues from the radiation, which started off as irritable bowel syndrome, and then it went into, developed into Crohn's disease. And I would get bowel blockages, and I wouldn't be able to eat, and I would throw up, and I didn't know what it was. And then they finally diagnosed me with that. But that was, again, about maybe 10 to 12 years after I finished treatment. So this is like 2001, 2002. And then I had lymph nodes taken from me when I first started treatment out of my groin because they thought they were cancerous, which they weren't. They were just enlarged. And eventually that caused a condition called lymphedema, which generally happens in a lot of women that have breast cancer. They get it in their arms. And your lymphatic system, it basically drains and it gets rid of a lot of toxins in your body. When your lymph nodes aren't working properly, you can swell. And it's not like normal leg swelling. It deals with proteins in your body. So you can't get rid of it through water pills, or you have to wear stockings, you have to wear wraps, and you have to push your fluid toward working lymph nodes. So that started. My right leg was like 3 or 4 times the size of my left leg because I didn't know what was wrong. And that, you know, each condition separately is hard enough to deal with, but to combine both of them, and then that caused me to have to retire from ESPN in 2008. And then I got put on long-term disability, and then I got put on regular disability.
So even though you can, you know, successfully beat cancer, it can't. The treatment can have long-term effects. In some cases, permanent.
Yeah, and that's one thing that they're finding out is children, especially pediatric kids. And there's not enough money being raised for pediatric causes. There's so much money being raised for breast cancer and for adult cancers, but pediatric cancers really don't get as much funding or as much attention you would think they would. With that, they have it's called late effects, and they're finding out now that chemotherapy and radiation have a lot of these later effects on kids in life, and it definitely is the case with me. And there's so many other people too that are affected. You know, you beat cancer, and there's a pride in that, of course, and then you feel, you know, this is the hardest life it's going to get. This is a lesson where I'm able to take and use my experiences and then use that in life. But if you can't work and you can't provide a living for yourself, what are you going to do? And you don't, it's kind of like a catch-22 because you certainly don't want to complain. You beat cancer and that's what you should be grateful for. But there's almost like a guilt that arrives too. So after I retired, I was just in a lot of pain, and I didn't really get off the couch. I was on a lot of pain medicines because I was trying to deal with a lot of different, conditions and how it affects my body. I was swollen like all over the place. And then I started to see like a chiropractor that had studied more natural medicine, where he put me on a lot of different, herbs and stuff that helped my blood work. My blood work got a little better. I was diagnosed with hemochromatosis, which is an overload of iron. So all those things in balance just kind of helped kind of regulate. That helped me feel a lot better. And then I said, okay, I want to be involved to do something. Yeah, you get like you're a drain on society. You feel like a burden because you can't. Like you need people to help you. You need people to help provide for you. I hate that. And I figured there's got to be something I can do to provide for myself. So I started to dab into podcasting. I had a friend of mine that taught me how to do podcasting. Sports is still my passion, so I did over 130 podcasts on sports. That's where I started my website. But I had written this about 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Why don't you, let's, okay, we're going to be editing this, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it's called My Scars Tell a Story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's really an inspiring book. I mean, I think the whole idea is that, you need a support system. You know, people who are fighting cancer, no matter what stage you are, even if you're, past all of the treatment, mutual support, just having, a network of people who get it, who are going through the same things that you've gone through, I think is really key to, to getting healthy, and staying healthy.
And there's a bunch that's involved now. Now, treatment is much more involved with the whole patient, and it's not just centered on chemotherapy, radiation, but you also, eating right, and the spiritual aspect of it. God had a big part with me with being able to understand and come to peace with why things happen to me. But this essentially it doesn't get into any other areas other than my life before I got sick, just to give some kind of a background, and then essentially like in-depth stuff of what I went through during transplant and treatment, basically to give people a real understanding of what I went through, and that I have a lot of worst-case scenarios with me. And people can get discouraged when they start chemo. And I also belong to an organization called Cancer University, which is it just started. It is a profit organization, which was started by somebody whose sister had cancer, and she realized that there's so much information out there where you can be overwhelmed when you get a diagnosis, and especially with parents and if you're supporting someone who has cancer, there's so much information. The doctor sits down and talks to you, and you're just totally overwhelmed with the terms, with your treatment, and meanwhile you're trying to think, okay, how do I best help my child or my spouse, and you feel overwhelmed. This at least helps educate you to these are the questions you should be asking. Kind of teach you to be your own advocate, and a lot of that is really important with making sure that you get second opinions, making sure that I like to encourage people now with all that's out there. Don't just settle for chemotherapy and radiation. There's way too much damage that it can cause. That doesn't mean I would never tell anybody not to do that, but you just want to make sure that you're really investigating all the possible options that are out there for you. There's a lot of Cancer Centers of America, St. Jude's. There's Sloan Kettering. There's a lot of different places now to go. There's a lot of natural centers that teach you how to eat better. Even if you do wind up doing chemo and radiation, still how to feed your body, how to feed your cells, how to take care of all those things which are so important in your body being able to maintain and heal itself too, because that's a lot of things that I try to do now is heal the damage that was done. So you get to a place where now how do I make a living for myself, and then also show others that can be inspired by me, that you don't you aren't limited by the things you suffer from. That, you know, God makes each of us unique. There's only one of me, there's only one of you, and we each have something individually that we can give to life, to each other, to help support, to be able to be an example to others and inspiration to others. And that's what I want to do.